Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. Let's take a look at the Bommer. This is their part number BB5036. I know you can't see that very well. Dash 545Z06. Pardon me, Z05-630. A lot of tape over that label. It's a BB5036 dash 545 dash Z05-630. Okay. Here's what it looks like. Now, if this hinge looks unusual to you, that would be certainly okay. It is an unusual hinge. There's no question about that at all. You don't see them very often. I would think, based on where I would typically see these, they would be in much older construction, several decades old. The 1970s, construction that I see built in that era has this type of hinge. And what is this? Well, this is what's called an anchor hinge, and is spectacular at doing its job. Before we get into why it's spectacular, let's touch on some basic dimensional properties. This is a 5-inch hinge, but it's going to be not immediately obvious where it's 5-inch. The leaf that's going to go to the frame, that overall height is going to be about 5 and 3/16 is what it ought to measure. The leaf that's going to go to the door, that's where our 5-inch will come in. Coming up a little shy on that. Yeah, well, okay. So it should be 1/8 of an inch less. That makes sense. This should be 4 7/8, and I'll explain why in a moment. This is a 5.4.5, so it's 4.5 inches wide when we lay the hinge open, and indeed, this is a heavyweight, so that means that this hinge should be 190 thousandths. Let's test that with the caliper. And it's going to be a template pattern for the standard 5-inch hinge. So the leaf thickness, I got it at 182 thousandths. It ought to be 190 thousandths on a 5-inch heavyweight. This is full mortise. When you bring the leaves parallel to each other, they're meant to be mortised flush to the door and frame. This is ball bearing. We know that it's ball bearing because we can see the ball bearing packets, but we also know that it's heavyweight, meaning the leaf thickness is nominally 190 thousandths and not 140 thousandths, because we see 4 bearing packets there. And lastly, this hinge is made of stainless steel. So it's solid stainless, and it is in a brushed finish. Has the Bommer logo on there, and right above it, it says Made in USA. This is going to include a fastener package. You're going to get you won't always get all machine screws and half wood screws, but that's a pretty typical arrangement of screws that you'll get when you're ordering such a hinge. About the screws, before we move on to talk about what an anchor hinge is, specify the screws that you need at the time of order, just to make sure you're getting the right makeup. I don't see anchor hinges installed in wood doors and wood frames, but I wouldn't really see why you wouldn't do that, and if that's what you had, you wouldn't get enough screws to get the job done. Let's talk about what an anchor hinge is, and we're going to dissect the part number as well. Let's do that next. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. So what is an anchor hinge? An anchor hinge, the word anchor to me is a good word. It's a little, I'm not sure what I would call this if I didn't call it an anchor hinge, but it does certainly anchor the door in the jamb as a result of how it's designed. I don't know how many decades back anchor hinges go. I would imagine probably a century or more on an anchor hinge. And every manufacturer is going to have a version of an anchor hinge. There are different lengths of the straps for those, so be mindful of that. If you're dealing with an installation that's older, I would be expecting the anchor hinge to very possibly be Bommer, very possibly be Stanley, very possibly be Hager, is who I would think. McKinney's been making hinges for several decades. So you have to be mindful when you are working on an anchor hinge to know a couple of things. The length of that top strap, the length of what's happening here, review the templates, and then another item which we'll get to in a moment. But what is an anchor hinge? Well, the bottom line is this. The leaf that goes into the jamb, it goes up right on the jamb, up at the header. The header literally is here, and the jamb is here. This hinge, it looks odd when you look at these out in the wild. Schools have these all the time. Schools built in the 1960s is where I see these. It's odd because that hinge is right at the top of the door, literally at the top of the door. And that's the other leaf. This becomes the top of the door. The reason that this leaf is shy by 1/8 of an inch, it's because you have to have that 1/8 of an inch margin there, but you still have to maintain the dimension down to the bottom of the leaf. So it's a 5-inch hinge, okay? And if you went to the underside of the header down 5 inch, that's where you would get that dimension. But you've got to shorten it by 1/8 of an inch up here to allow that 1/8 inch gap between the underside of the header and the top of the door. Now, why would you use an anchor hinge? Well, anytime that you have a very high volume door, like in a school, hollow metal door, probably hollow metal frame, most likely, extremely high volume, heavy gauge door, heavy gauge frame, lots of weight in terms of hardware, and the door is going to be cycled possibly hundreds of times a day, and possibly in a semi-abusive type environment. You'll want an anchor hinge, because as the door is in the frame, if you ever notice doors that are, if you take notice of doors, they tend to want to tip out of the frame like this. That gap on an existing door, if there is wear and tear on the hinge, the margins between the knuckles get larger. One leaf will start to sink because it will literally grind the metal down. The door will start to sag, and you'll notice extreme sagging, especially when the door does not latch anymore. Okay, when the door doesn't latch anymore, it will give you that sort of a problem, in the sense of, why isn't the door latching? It used to latch because the door has sagged, the hinge is fatigued. But what happens is, and it's because all the weight of the door is really being, the majority, 70% actually, of the weight of the door is being borne by that top hinge. That hinge is going to have a tendency to separate and open up. When you have an anchor hinge, you're literally attaching the hinge to the underside of the header. You're literally attaching the door leaf to the top of the door, and all of the forces in this situation of the door wanting to fall out like this are completely resisted because of the anchoring aspect to the installation itself, rendering these extremely durable hinges. In fact, we sell hinges all the time for existing doors. We rarely sell replacement anchor hinges, and it's because they really don't wear out. In this instance, this is a replacement hinge. I don't know how old the existing hinge is, but looking at the ship-to address and having an idea of what that facility is, I'm going to say the hinge is likely decades old that this is replacing. An anchor hinge would only be used in the top location. That's the only place you're going to use it. When you're doing an anchor hinge with other hinges, you must have the same gauge or the same weight. You'd have to use heavyweight hinges. 1. 2, you would have to use the same width. So on your other 2 or 3 or more hinges, they don't have to be 5-inch tall, but they do have to be 4.5-inch wide, along with them being heavyweight. Otherwise, it's not going to work correctly. So they must be that. Now the question really becomes is, do you change the location of the second hinge to account for the fact that you've scooched that top hinge up 5-inch, 6.5-inch, 7-inch, a little bit more than 7-inch, possibly closer to 10-inch? I would say that you generally don't. But if I was doing a job, I would bring it to the architect's attention if it wasn't thought out. I might say, hey, Do you want me to increase, pardon me, would you like for me to decrease the height of the second hinge by half of the dimension of the top of what it would otherwise be, top of door to the top of the first hinge? Do you want me to reduce that, move it up half of that dimension, and that should even it out pretty well? May not matter, but someone will have the eye to possibly notice that. I would likely notice it if I was walking, if I had a clear approach to the elevation of a building. I would want those hinges looking symmetrical on the opening. It's never been brought an issue to my knowledge, but there you go. So anchor hinge, super durable, super reliable, super long lasting. Now let's switch to the screen view and let's look at all the supporting information. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now let's get back to it. Okay, let's take a look and see what we're looking at with this hinge. Factory image here. Let's take a look at our images of this hinge. It's a bit odd, but in terms of how you look at it, such a hinge. BB5036. So it's ball bearing. 5036 is going to refer to several things, and we're going to dissect the part number. 5x4.5, 630. Just showing you different perspectives. That would be the door open at 180 degree. That's what the underside of the header would see. That's the hinge turned upside down, showing the door at 90 degree basically in the screw package. Okay, so description down below. For heavyweight, high-frequency doors, absolutely. Anchor hinges provide increased reinforcement at the door and jamb where stress can occur. Used at the top only, and you're going to use one of these series of hinges in the other locations. This is stainless steel with a stainless pin. This is a left-hand door and square edge. That's really important. Not only are these handed, but it really depends. The hinge that you select, you must declare if it's beveled or square edge. And there's a really important reason for that. And that reason is if you have a square edge door, how those leaves are bent or the swag that's put on them is a different angle of bend that you would have versus your door being beveled. So, you know, this leaf is going to be the problem is this leaf needs to be bent. You know, the angle between a center line versus it being beveled or square edge must be determined. You're not going to get good success by using the wrong hinge in the application. Let's see. Now this will work good enough. What I'm trying to say is this is for a square edge door, so when these leaves are brought parallel, the bend on the leaf is based on that being a square edge door. If you had a beveled edge door, the bend in here is not going to be as great because that door leaf is actually going to come off this way if I exaggerated. Okay. 4-inch door arm, that's really important as well because the door arm here is 4-inch. There are different sizes of those, lengths of those. And we'll take a look at other options that are available, at least according to Bommer, in terms of that door leaf length. 4-inch arm. Okay, template pattern. That means that the location of the screw holes would match any 5-inch hinge that's been made to the template pattern. Again, ball bearing, 5-knuckle, 4 ball bearings. Non-removable pin is standard. Non-removable pin standard. This is a NRP hinge. I don't know if that's obvious in any of my photographs. Yeah, you can kind of see evidence of it here. That's a drilled and tapped hole that's right there, rendering that pin all but impossible to drive out when that has been seated. 190 thousandths. Now let's look at the cut sheet. This is probably a template. Yeah, it is. This is going to give you all the dimensional properties of the hinge. 5x4.5 heavyweight anchor. The dimensions on the frame, the header leaf, and the door leaf. The location of the screw holes, the width of each strap. Additional good information here as well. 5034, 5035, 36. All heavyweight steel, non-ferrous, brass, or bronze, or stainless. That's a 5-knuckle. These are 3-knuckle down here. So let's decode the part number. So there's a link below this video as seen here to the manufacturer's page. When that pulls up, here's that page. There's a how to order matrix. You can open that document. So if you recall, we're dealing with a BB, so it's ball bearing, 5-knuckle, 0, full mortise, 3, anchor, 6, heavyweight stainless. Really easy. 545. So if it's 545, it is an anchor hinge, because Bommer's saying they're not going to make you a 5" by 4.5. They'll do a 5x4 or a 5x5, is what they're saying there. Nothing in the door option page. Nothing in the tip and pin option. In this part number, we are getting a J. And we are getting, well, nothing under the tips, just a button tip. Inherently, this is a stainless steel pin. Security options, it's inherently an N here. It comes that way. Now, anchor and slip-in options. Z05, it's a left hand for a square door with a 4-inch arm. You can see that there's a left hand for a square door with a 7.5-inch door arm. You can see that there's a left hand bevel door 4-inch arm, and so on. Z01 through Z10. No electric options. And then we have 630. That's going to be our stainless steel. Okay, that's the hinge. Now, on this manufacturer's page are a couple of very useful links as well. First of all, there's the entire product catalog. Very helpful if you wanted to see everything that Bommer made. And then there's this video that we created, which is about 3 dozen hinges that we've put on our machine, and we have taken video of the finish of what all of these look like. This is in a very low res. Very low res. Okay. A little higher resolution. You can see the finish much better there. Apparently YouTube's delivering it at a very low res. US 10, 639. Solid brass and a plated finish. US 26 or 625. Really, it's helpful. People like to be able to see what finishes look like. And it doesn't only apply to Bommer. I mean, Bommer's US or BHMA finishes are going to match everyone else's to within the extent that Bommer's chemistry, the science behind the finish process, would match someone else's. But the point is that US 15 is US 15 by any manufacturer, and it ought to match. 651 is steel-based and a plated polished chrome finish. It would match any other manufacturer. And indeed, that was the entire purpose of the US system, because before the early 1930s, you had several hardware manufacturers that all made hardware in very unusual finishes, in the sense that one manufacturer's finish didn't match the other manufacturer's finish. So Sargent may make a Colombian espresso bronze, whatever that finish is. We could only guess. And Hager would make, you know, a antiqued espresso bronze. Well, the bottom line is there was a government-led initiative bringing manufacturers together in the very early 1930s that said, come up with a U.S. system of finishes so that the owner can buy hinges from Sargent or hinges from Hager and lock sets from Sargent and order it all in 626 finish, or in those instances US 26D, and have it all match. That's the point. Let's wrap up this video on camera. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. So, the bottom line is this may be the last anchor hinge that I ever see from Bommer, and admittedly, I never did see them very often because, like I said, they're just not replaced very often, and that's because 2021 or so, Bommer announced that they were ceasing operations of hinges and other door-related hardware, which is an awful shame because the brothers Bommer started the company in 1876, and the gentleman who ran Bommer in 2021, he was the husband of one of the two granddaughters he was the husband of a granddaughter of one of the two brothers, is what I meant to say. So decades and generations of family manufacturing in the United States, solely in the United States. Nothing was ever imported from Bommer. The only company that made hinges that could make that claim, as far as I know, at least on a larger scale. And it's an awful shame. There are products that they made that there is no replacement for. They're 7000 series. The 7800 has other items that you can get your hands on, semi-equivalents, but there's 7000, the 770, the 7010s, the 7020s, the 7300s. There's no replacement for this material. And if you scroll through the Bommer catalog, you'll see items that you've seen in life, and some of it's just no longer available. Why that happened, I have my theory, but regardless of that theory, it's unfortunate that that's the situation. Any questions on an anchor hinge or any other Bommer product, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, please subscribe, and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.